They said the baby wasn't mine. The court file said she had been my daughter since before she could walk. I want to start with that sentence, because for almost 7 years, I carried a child through fevers, first words, daycare forms, nightmares, speech therapy appointments, school registration, birthday candles, and the ordinary 1,000 small decisions that make up actual motherhood, only to sit across from my own family in a lawyer's office and hear them reduce all of that to a temporary favor I had supposedly done for my younger sister. They said I had been helping out. They said I had stepped in during a hard season. They said I needed to remember that the baby had never really been mine. And I remember sitting there, listening to those words land with a kind of cold precision, knowing that I did not need to argue louder than them. I only needed to open the folder in front of me. My name is Maren. I am 37 years old now, and the child at the center of this story is named Clara. She is 7. She likes blueberry pancakes, yellow rain boots, and drawing houses with enormous windows. She calls every dog she sees sir, even the tiny ones. She sleeps with one hand tucked under her cheek and the other curled around the corner of a faded pink blanket I bought her during her first week in my apartment, back when she was still too small to understand that everyone around her was making decisions about her life. I was 30 when Clara was born. My younger sister, Tessa, was 24. Tessa had always been the bright, impulsive one in our family, the kind of person who could walk into a room late and somehow make everyone forgive her before she even apologized. Growing up, she was the one people worried about and excused in equal measure. If she missed rent, someone helped. If she quit a job suddenly, someone explained that she was still finding herself. If she hurt someone's feelings, our mother would sigh and say, "You know how Tessa is. She feels everything too intensely." I do not say this with cruelty. I loved my sister. In many ways I still do, though that love is much more careful now, more aware of edges. Tessa had good qualities that were real. She could be funny in a way that made an entire dinner table collapse into laughter. She remembered strange details from people's lives. She bought gifts that showed she had genuinely listened. But she was also unreliable in the way that eventually stops feeling charming and starts becoming expensive for everyone around her, emotionally and sometimes literally. When she told us she was pregnant, our family reacted with the exact mixture I think she expected: surprise, concern, and then a kind of organized rescue response. My mother, Elaine, immediately started talking about baby supplies. My older brother, Daniel, asked careful questions about money. I asked Tessa what she wanted. I still remember her sitting on my couch that evening, one knee pulled up, twisting the edge of a throw pillow between her fingers. She looked young in a way that made my chest ache. Not young as in childish, exactly, but young as in unanchored. She told me she wanted to keep the baby. She told me the father was not going to be involved. She told me she was scared but excited. And I believed her, because I wanted to. I wanted to believe that something as serious and irreversible as a baby would gather her scattered pieces into something steady. For a while, we all acted as though that might happen. My mother threw herself into preparation. Daniel helped her find a safer apartment. I drove her to appointments when she asked, though she missed nearly as many as she attended. I kept a small notebook in my bag with questions to ask the doctor, because Tessa would often forget what she had meant to ask once she was actually in the room. I remember the ultrasound where we learned the baby was a girl, Tessa laughing and crying at the same time while I watched the small flicker of life on the screen, and felt something complicated move through me, something protective before protection had technically been asked of me. Clara was born 5 weeks early, on a rainy Thursday in November. Tessa called me at 3:12 in the morning, panicked and breathless, telling me her water had broken. I drove to her apartment in sweatpants and an old coat, my hair twisted badly at the back of my head, and found her standing in the doorway holding one hospital bag and one ridiculous oversized stuffed giraffe she insisted the baby needed immediately. I drove her to the hospital with the windshield wipers moving too fast across the glass, both of us quiet between contractions. The labor was long and frightening in places. Clara's heart rate dipped twice. Tessa became overwhelmed and angry, snapping at nurses, then apologizing, then crying. I held her hand because there was no one else there to hold it. Our mother arrived later that morning, already performing competence, asking nurses questions in a tone that made it clear she expected to be treated as the person in charge. Daniel came after work, pale and awkward, standing near the vending machines because delivery rooms made him nervous. When Clara finally arrived, she was small and furious, with a cry much stronger than her tiny body suggested. They placed her on Tessa's chest for only a moment before taking her to be checked, and I remember Tessa turning her face toward me with an expression I had never seen on her before. It was not joy exactly, it was awe mixed with terror. She whispered, "She's so real." That sentence stayed with me for years. Because Clara was early and underweight, she spent several days in the hospital. Nothing catastrophic happened, but everything felt fragile. She had trouble maintaining her temperature. Feeding took patience. The nurses were kind but direct. Tessa needed to learn schedules, signs, measurements, tiny practical things that did not care how overwhelmed she felt. I watched her try. I also watched her drift away from trying whenever the effort became too relentless. She would hold Clara and whisper beautiful things, then hand her back when the baby cried too long. She would promise the nurses she understood the feeding instructions, then ask me later to explain them again. I did not judge her then. I told myself she was exhausted. I told myself all new mothers were frightened. I told myself the steadiness would come. It did not come. The first 3 months after Clara was discharged became a pattern of crisis and rescue. Tessa called me constantly. Clara would not sleep. Clara would not eat. Tessa was too tired. The apartment felt too small. The baby cried in a way that made her feel trapped. Sometimes when I arrived, Tessa would be doing her best, hair unwashed, eyes red, Clara bundled against her chest. Other times, I would find Clara in her bassinet crying, while Tessa sat on the bathroom floor with headphones in. Not because she did not hear her, but because she could not bear hearing her anymore. I begged Tessa to let me help her get professional support. I drove her to postpartum appointments. I spoke gently about counseling, about medication if her doctor recommended it, about not having to pretend this was easy. For brief windows, she agreed. Then she stopped going. My mother had opinions but little consistency. She would criticize Tessa harshly on Monday and excuse her completely by Friday. Daniel visited when asked, brought groceries, and then left with the visible relief of someone returning to a quiet house. I became, gradually and without any formal announcement, the person Clara could depend on. At first it was 1 overnight, then 2, then weekends, then Tessa asking if Clara could stay with me, just until I get back on my feet. I bought a crib for my apartment because the portable bassinet no longer felt safe. I changed my work hours. I learned which formula Clara tolerated, which lullaby soothed her, which pediatrician had the gentlest nurse. I kept receipts in a folder, not because I imagined I would ever need to prove anything, but because I had always been organized in a way my family found both useful and faintly irritating. When Clara was 5 months old, Tessa left town for what she called a reset. She said she needed a weekend away with friends. She came back 12 days later. By then, I had already spoken to a family services caseworker. I want to be very clear about this part, because it is easy, from the outside, to imagine that decisions like this happen dramatically, with one terrible scene and one decisive phone call. In my experience, they happen through accumulation. One missed appointment, one unanswered call, one unopened pack of diapers. One moment when you look at a baby sleeping in your living room and realize that love, by itself, is not a safe enough plan. The caseworker's name was Ms. Givens. She was calm, practical, and kind in a way that did not soften the seriousness of what she was documenting. She explained kinship placement. She explained temporary guardianship. She explained that if Tessa was unable to provide stable care, the safest immediate arrangement was for Clara to remain with a family member already caring for her. Tessa cried when this was first discussed, and for a short while she insisted she could take Clara back immediately. Then Ms. Givens asked her about housing, childcare, income, and follow-up medical appointments, and Tessa's answers began dissolving. I did not want to become Clara's mother by paperwork. I want you to understand that. I did not sit in that office feeling victorious or chosen. I sat there feeling like every adult in Clara's life had collectively failed to make this easier. I wanted my sister well. I wanted Clara safe. I wanted those two things to stop feeling like they were pulling in opposite directions. The first order gave me temporary legal guardianship for 6 months. Tessa agreed to it, at least formally. She told everyone it was just until she got stable. My mother repeated that phrase often, just until Tessa gets stable. Daniel used it too. It became the family's comfortable explanation, the sentence that allowed everyone to accept my complete responsibility without having to acknowledge what it truly meant. Just until Tessa gets stable. During those 6 months, Clara learned to sit up. She got 2 tiny teeth. She developed an ear infection that kept both of us awake for 3 nights. I took her to the pediatrician. I sat with her in a steamy bathroom at 2 a.m. because the congestion scared me. I learned the difference between tired crying, hungry crying, and the thin, sharp cry that meant something was genuinely wrong. Tessa visited twice. Once she brought a stuffed rabbit. Once she stayed for 40 minutes and spent most of that time texting. When the temporary order came up for review, Tessa did not appear in court. I did. That became another pattern. By Clara's first birthday, the court had extended my guardianship. By her second birthday, Tessa had moved twice, changed phone numbers 3 times, and visited Clara so unpredictably that Miss Givens recommended limiting visits to scheduled, supervised contact for Clara's stability. Tessa was furious when she heard that. She called me selfish. She called me controlling. She said I liked being seen as the responsible one. Then she disappeared again for 4 months. It was during that disappearance that I began considering adoption. The word felt enormous when I first allowed myself to think it. Adoption sounded final in a way guardianship had not. Guardianship still carried the fantasy of return. Adoption asked me to admit what Clara's life already knew. That I was the person who woke up when she cried, the person who signed medical forms, the person whose shirt she gripped when strangers leaned too close, the person she called Mama without anyone teaching her to do it. The first time she called me that, I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing a sippy cup. She was on the floor with blocks, wearing pajamas with tiny moons on them. She looked up, held out a block and said, "Mama." Not perfectly. More like Mama, soft and unsteady. I froze with water running over my hand. I had not asked for that word. I had not trained her toward it. I had referred to Tessa by name because all the parenting books and therapists told me honesty mattered. I had called myself Maren. Aunt Maren sometimes, but Clara chose the word her daily life had taught her. I cried quietly after she fell asleep that night, sitting on the floor beside her crib, because the word felt like both a gift and a grief. When I told my mother I was speaking with an attorney about adoption, she reacted as though I had betrayed the family. "She is Tessa's baby," she said. I remember standing in my mother's kitchen, the same kitchen where we had spent years discussing Tessa's crises as though they were weather systems we simply had to endure. Clara was in the living room stacking plastic cups. My mother lowered her voice anyway, as if a 2-year-old could understand the legal implications of what we were discussing. "She needs stability," I said. "She needs her real mother." I remember that phrase because it did something painful and clarifying inside me. Real mother. As though the word real belonged to biology alone. As though every bottle, every fever, every daycare pickup, every night terror, every insurance form, every developmental screening, every sacrifice I had made existed in some lesser category of care. I asked my mother where Tessa was. She looked away. The adoption process was not simple, and I am grateful now that it was not simple. It should not be easy to permanently alter a child's legal relationship to a biological parent. There were hearings, evaluations, notices, waiting periods, interviews. Tessa eventually appeared with a public defender and said she did not want to lose her rights. The judge gave her a plan: stable housing, regular visits, parenting classes, communication with the caseworker, proof that she could provide consistent care. For 3 months, Tessa tried. I will give her that. She attended 2 visits. She brought Clara a picture book. She cried after the second visit when Clara hid behind my leg and would not go to her easily. Then she missed the 3rd visit, then the 4th. Then she stopped returning calls. 8 months later, Tessa signed a voluntary relinquishment. I was not in the room when she signed it. I have often wondered whether that made it easier or harder for her. My attorney called me afterward and told me the document had been filed. I remember sitting in my parked car outside the grocery store, one hand on the steering wheel, Clara asleep in her car seat behind me, and feeling no emotion I could name cleanly. Relief, yes. Sorrow, yes. Anger, yes. Gratitude, maybe. Fear, certainly. Because the law was finally catching up to our life, and the fact that this was good for Clara did not make it painless. The adoption was finalized when Clara was 2 years and 11 months old. The courthouse was small and ordinary. The judge wore reading glasses low on her nose and smiled at Clara when Clara became fascinated by the microphone. I wore a navy dress. Clara wore a yellow cardigan and shoes she kept trying to remove. Daniel came. My mother came, though she looked strained. Tessa did not. The judge asked me a series of questions I answered carefully. Did I understand that adoption created a permanent legal parent-child relationship? Yes. Did I understand that this order would be final? Yes. Then the judge signed the decree, and Clara became, in every legal sense, my daughter. Afterward, I took her for pancakes because I did not know what else to do with the size of the day. She smeared syrup on her sleeve and laughed at a man in the next booth who made a funny face at her. I watched her, this small person whose life had already contained too many adults failing to be steady, and I promised myself that whatever else happened, I would never treat her belonging as conditional. For the next 4 years, life became ordinary in the most beautiful and exhausting ways. Clara started preschool. She developed a dramatic fear of automatic hand dryers. She insisted on wearing rain boots when there was no rain. She called Daniel Uncle Dan and my mother Grandma Elaine, though my mother's relationship with her remained complicated. My mother loved Clara, I believe that. But she also carried a stubborn loyalty to the idea of Tessa as Clara's real mother, even when Tessa herself remained inconsistent and distant. Sometimes my mother would correct people gently when they called me Clara's mother. Maren is her aunt, she would say, then add, after a pause, but she's raising her. I hated that sentence, but I did not fight every small battle. That is one of the things motherhood teaches you. You learn which battles protect the child and which only exhaust you. Clara knew who packed her lunch. Clara knew whose bed she came to after nightmares. Clara knew who clapped at preschool songs and sat through parent-teacher conferences and cut grapes into quarters long after it was probably necessary, because fear makes some habits linger. When Clara was 6, Tessa came back. Not physically at first. She came back through social media. New pictures, new captions, new language about healing and reclaiming her life. She messaged me one evening after nearly 9 months of silence, asking how my baby girl was doing. My entire body tensed at the phrase. I responded carefully. I told her Clara was well. I told her that if she wanted to discuss appropriate contact, we could speak with the family therapist we had used before. She did not answer for 3 days. Then she sent a long message about how she had been young, how everyone had pressured her, how she had never understood what she was signing, how she wanted a relationship with her daughter. Her daughter. I stared at those words for a long time. I did not respond emotionally. I contacted my attorney instead. Her name was Ms. Calder, and she had handled the final stages of Clara's adoption. She was precise, direct, and very good at explaining the difference between emotional claims and legal ones. She reviewed the decree again. She confirmed what I already knew. The adoption was final. Tessa had no parental rights. Any contact would happen at my discretion, guided by Clara's well-being, not Tessa's sudden desire to rewrite history. I wanted to believe that would be enough. It was not. Within weeks, Tessa began contacting relatives. She told them she had been manipulated. She told them I had taken advantage of her postpartum depression. She told them she had always wanted Clara back but had been shut out. She used words that sounded legally meaningful to people who did not understand the actual court record. Coercion, pressure, temporary agreement, stolen. She called Clara the baby they took from me, and with each retelling, my role became darker. My mother believed parts of it because she wanted to. Daniel did not exactly. But he hated conflict and kept trying to find middle ground where no middle ground existed. He would call me and say things like, "Maybe you could let Tessa feel heard," as though I had not spent years arranging safe opportunities for Tessa to be involved when Clara was younger. As though the issue was whether Tessa felt heard, not whether Clara's stability was being threatened by an adult who appeared whenever guilt became too heavy. Then came the trust. My mother's older sister, Aunt Lydia, died that spring. Lydia had been private, sharp, and more observant than anyone gave her credit for. She had no children of her own, and her will left several modest gifts to relatives, including education funds for the younger children in the family. Clara was named specifically. I did not know this until the estate attorney contacted me to confirm Clara's legal name and my mailing address. The amount was not enormous by wealthy family standards, but it was significant to us. $75,000 in a protected education account, enough to change the shape of Clara's future, enough to matter. And suddenly, Tessa's language changed. She no longer spoke only about wanting a relationship. She began saying Clara's education fund should be managed by her biological mother. She said Aunt Lydia had meant the gift for Tessa's child, not for me to control. My mother, to my astonishment, asked whether it might be more fair to let Tessa have some say. I remember standing in my hallway during that phone call, Clara in the bathtub singing to herself down the hall, and feeling a coldness move through me that was not anger yet. It was recognition. Because for years my family had been able to minimize what I was doing, precisely because there was no money attached to it. When motherhood meant sleepless nights, medical bills, childcare, and emotional labor, everyone was comfortable calling me generous. But the moment motherhood came with legal authority over an education fund, suddenly everyone needed to revisit what I really was. That was when the sentence started appearing. She's not really your baby. My mother said it first, though not in those exact words. She said, "You have to understand, Maren, Clara will always be Tessa's child in some ways." Then Tessa said it more directly during a family meeting I should never have agreed to. We met at my mother's house on a Sunday afternoon. Daniel was there. Tessa was there, looking healthier than she had in years, which made the whole thing more painful because part of me wanted to be happy for her. My mother had made coffee no one drank. Clara was not there. I had arranged for her to spend the afternoon with a friend from school because whatever happened in that living room was not for her ears. Tessa began by crying. She said she had missed so much. She said she regretted everything. She said she woke up every day thinking about the baby she lost. I listened. I told her I was glad she was doing better. I told her Clara deserved honesty and stability. I told her we could explore limited, therapist-guided contact if Tessa could commit to consistency. Then Tessa's face changed. "You keep talking like you get to decide everything," she said. "But she wasn't yours." The room went very still. I looked at my mother. She looked down at her hands. Daniel closed his eyes. Tessa continued, voice shaking but hard. "You were supposed to help. You were supposed to keep her safe until I could. You don't get to erase the fact that I'm her mother." I remember the strange calm that came over me then. It felt almost outside my body. For years I had feared this moment, the accusation underneath every family hesitation finally spoken plainly. And once it was spoken, it became smaller. Not less painful, but more manageable. A sentence is something you can answer. A fog is harder. I said, "The court made me her mother." Tessa laughed once, bitterly. "A court paper doesn't change blood." "No," I said, "but it does protect a child from adults who confuse blood with responsibility." My mother gasped softly, as though I had said something cruel. Maybe I had. Maybe sometimes precision sounds cruel to people who've been protected by vagueness for too long. The meeting ended badly. Tessa left crying. My mother said I had been unnecessarily harsh. Daniel asked me to give everyone time. I gave them exactly 10 days. On the 11th day, Tessa's attorney sent a letter to Aunt Lydia's estate attorney, challenging my authority to manage Clara's education trust. The letter did not seek to overturn the adoption directly, because even Tessa's attorney appeared to understand that would be nearly impossible. Instead, it used careful language suggesting that Clara's biological mother had concerns about whether I was acting in Clara's best interests, and whether Aunt Lydia's intentions had been properly interpreted. It was a narrow legal maneuver, but the emotional message was unmistakable. They were going to try to make me prove my motherhood. So I did. Not on social media, not in family text threads, not through tearful arguments in my mother's kitchen. I did it the way I had learned to do everything important since Clara first came home with me. I built the file. I gathered every order from the beginning. Temporary guardianship, extensions, caseworker reports, visitation records, notices sent to Tessa, missed visit logs, the voluntary relinquishment form bearing Tessa's signature, the transcript from the adoption hearing, the final adoption decree, Clara's amended birth certificate listing me as her parent, pediatric records showing me as the responsible party from infancy onward, daycare enrollment forms, school emergency contact records, insurance documentation, Therapy notes from the family therapist recommending consistency and caution in any reintroduction of Tessa into Clara's life. I did not gather these documents because I wanted to humiliate my sister. I gathered them because truth, when people are determined to blur it, deserves structure. Ms. Calder reviewed everything and then requested the complete court file from Clara's adoption case, including the transcript from the hearing where Tessa had formally confirmed her voluntary relinquishment. I had never read that transcript before. I knew what had happened legally, but I had not seen the words arranged so plainly on paper. When the transcript arrived, I sat at my kitchen table after Clara went to bed and read it alone. There was Tessa, answering the judge. Do you understand that by signing this document you are voluntarily terminating your parental rights? Yes. Has anyone threatened you or forced you to sign this document? No. Do you understand that adoption by Maren will create a permanent legal parent-child relationship between Maren and Clara? Yes. Do you believe this adoption is in Clara's best interests? A pause was noted in the transcript. Then Tessa's answer. Yes. I read that line 3 times. Not because it made me glad. It did not. It broke my heart in a different way. Because there, preserved in the plain language of the court, was a version of my sister who had known the truth at least once. She had known that Clara needed stability. She had known that I was not stealing her child. She had known that love sometimes meant admitting you could not be what a child needed, even if that admission destroyed something in you. The transcript did not make Tessa a villain. It made her later story impossible. The estate attorney scheduled a meeting. Tessa, my mother, Daniel, Miss Calder, Tessa's attorney, and the trustee for Aunt Lydia's education funds all attended. We met in a conference room with too much glass and a long table polished so thoroughly that everyone looked faintly reflected in it, as though there were ghost versions of us beneath the surface. I remember what I wore because I chose it deliberately: a charcoal blazer, a white blouse, small earrings, nothing dramatic, nothing soft enough to invite pity. I wanted to look like what I was, Clara's mother, prepared to protect her. Tessa sat across from me. My mother sat beside her. Daniel sat at the end, looking miserable. Tessa's attorney opened with a careful statement about biological connection and family intention. He said Tessa was not seeking conflict. He said she only wanted assurance that Clara's inheritance would be managed in accordance with Aunt Lydia's wishes. He said at one point that the unique maternal circumstances should be acknowledged. Miss Calder let him finish. Then she opened my folder. I have never forgotten the sound of paper sliding across that table. It was quiet, almost gentle. She began with the adoption decree, then the amended birth certificate, then the voluntary relinquishment, then the transcript. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult anyone. She simply read the relevant portions aloud. Do you understand that adoption by Maren will create a permanent legal parent-child relationship between Maren and Clara? Yes. Do you believe this adoption is in Clara's best interests? Yes. Tessa stared at the table. My mother's face changed slowly, not dramatically, but in pieces. First confusion, then discomfort, then something close to shame. I think she had allowed herself to believe Tessa's newer version because it hurt less than the older one. It hurt less to imagine that Tessa had been robbed than to admit Tessa had chosen, in a moment of painful clarity, to let Clara have the mother she needed. Miss Calder then presented the records showing my continuous care, pediatric visits, school forms, financial support, therapy recommendations. She explained that Clara's education trust was legally intended for Clara, and that as Clara's legal parent, I had authority to manage it under the trustee's oversight. Tessa's biological connection did not create management rights. It did not undo the adoption. It did not override 7 years of documented care. The trustee, an older woman named Mrs. Bell, listened without much expression. When Miss Calder finished, Mrs. Bell looked at Tessa's attorney and asked whether he had any legal authority contradicting the adoption decree. He did not. Then Mrs. Bell said something I still think about. This trust follows the child's legal reality, not the family's discomfort with it. No one spoke for several seconds. That sentence ended the meeting, though we remained in the room for another 20 minutes discussing administrative details. Tessa cried silently. Daniel put his head in his hands. My mother did not look at me. I felt no triumph. I need to say that because people sometimes expect vindication to feel clean. It did not. It felt like standing in the wreckage of a house I had spent years pretending was only untidy. It felt necessary, and it felt sad. After the meeting, my mother followed me into the parking lot. Maren, she said. I stopped beside my car. For a moment she looked older than she ever had. Smaller, somehow. She held her purse with both hands. I didn't know she said all of that in court, she said. I wanted to say, you could have known. I wanted to say, you could have asked. I wanted to say, you watched me raise her and still made me prove it. Instead, I said, you didn't want to know. She flinched, but she did not deny it. I think I kept hoping, she said slowly, that there was a way for Tessa not to have lost so much. I looked through the windshield of my car at Clara's booster seat in the back. A small sticker from school was stuck to one strap. I remember focusing on that sticker because it gave my eyes somewhere to rest. Tessa lost something, I said. But Clara was not an object that got misplaced. She was a child who needed someone to stay. My mother began to cry then, quietly, not performatively. I had seen my mother cry before, but rarely from accountability. It unsettled me. I'm sorry, she said. I did not forgive her in that parking lot. Forgiveness is too large a word for a moment like that. But I accepted that something had finally become visible to her, and that mattered. Tessa did not speak to me for 6 weeks. During that time, I focused on Clara. I met with the trustee. I set up the education account properly. I informed Clara's school that no information was to be shared with extended family without my written permission, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because boundaries are only meaningful when systems support them. I also met with Clara's therapist to discuss how to handle Tessa's possible reappearance. Clara knew Tessa existed. She knew Tessa had given birth to her. We had always used age-appropriate truth because secrets rot things from the inside. But knowing a biological fact is not the same as being ready for an adult's emotional hunger. Clara was 7. Her job was to be 7, not to soothe Tessa's regret. When Tessa finally called, her voice was flat from crying or exhaustion or both. I read the transcript, she said. I was standing in the laundry room folding Clara's pajamas. I leaned against the dryer. I figured you had. I forgot some of it, she said. I believed her. Not completely, perhaps, but enough. Pain edits memory. Guilt edits memory. People sometimes replace what happened with what they can survive believing. You told the judge the adoption was best for her, I said. I know. There was a long silence. Then she said, I think I needed you to be the villain because otherwise I had to be the mother who left. I closed my eyes. There are sentences that do not repair anything but still matter because they are true. That was one of them. I told her I was willing to discuss a path forward, but not one built on confusion. She would not be introduced to Clara as her mother. She would not undermine my role. She would not mention the trust. She would not appear and disappear according to her own emotional needs. If she wanted contact, it would begin slowly, with letters reviewed by the therapist, then possibly supervised meetings if Clara showed interest and stability. Tessa cried again, but this time she did not argue. The first letter she wrote to Clara was not perfect. It was too emotional in places. It said, I missed you every day, which the therapist suggested changing because it placed too much weight on Clara. Tessa revised it. The final version was simple. She said she was someone who knew Clara when she was very small. She said she was glad Clara was loved. She said she hoped someday they could know each other in a way that felt safe and comfortable for Clara. I read it 10 times before showing it to her. Clara listened carefully. Then she asked if Tessa liked pancakes. I said I thought she did. Clara nodded and asked if she could draw her a picture of a pancake wearing a crown. That is the strange mercy of children. Adults build storms around identity and blood and regret. Children ask about pancakes. We are still moving slowly. Tessa has had 2 supervised visits with Clara in the therapist's office. They were gentle, awkward, not miraculous. Clara was polite and curious, then tired afterward. Tessa behaved appropriately, though I could see the effort it took for her not to ask for too much. My mother has stopped correcting people when they call me Clara's mother. Daniel apologized in his quiet, awkward way, saying he should have been clearer sooner. I told him yes, he should have. As for Clara, she knows she is loved. That is the most important record I am building now, though it is not one a court can stamp. I still keep the original adoption decree in a fireproof box in my closet. I keep copies digitally as well. There is a part of me that wishes I did not have to think that way, that motherhood could remain purely emotional, purely lived. But I have learned that when a child's stability depends on adults telling the truth, documentation is not cold. It is care made visible. Sometimes, after Clara falls asleep, I think about the phrase that started everything. The baby wasn't mine. I understand now that people say things like that when they want biology to erase responsibility, or when regret arrives too late and needs somewhere to go. They say it because it is simpler than admitting that motherhood is not a single moment. It is not just birth, it is not just blood. It is the repeated decision to stay when staying is inconvenient, exhausting, expensive, frightening, and unseen. Clara was not mine because I wanted her to be. She became mine because every part of her life asked someone to be steady, and I answered. She became mine in the emergency room at midnight, and in the pediatric waiting room, and on the daycare form, and beside the crib, and outside the preschool door, and in the courthouse where a judge asked me if I understood permanence. Yes, I understood it then. I understand it even more now. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, it is this. The people who dismiss your role may do so loudly, emotionally, even convincingly, but the truth of sustained care leaves a record. Sometimes that record is legal paperwork, sometimes it is a school file, sometimes it is a medical chart, sometimes it is a child reaching for you in a crowded room because her body knows who has always come back. Here is a second truth. Family love without boundaries can become a place where unstable people are allowed to rewrite reality at the expense of the child who most needs reality to remain steady. Compassion matters, but compassion for an adult's regret can never be allowed to outrank a child's safety. Here is a third truth. Quiet vindication does not always feel like winning. Sometimes it feels like finally being believed after years of being politely doubted. Sometimes it feels like sitting in a conference room while the papers say what your exhausted heart has known all along. And here is the last truth I want to leave you with. The baby they said wasn't mine is asleep down the hall right now, 7 years old, one front tooth loose, a library book open beside her pillow, trusting completely that when morning comes, I will be there. That is not an argument. That is motherhood.